everybody, and thank you for joining us for this week's Lunch with a Scientist. Today, we are joined by Dr. Seth Frisbie. He has over 35 years of experience working in public health. He is the principal or co-author on numerous articles in referred journals, chapters in scientific books, and government and United Nations reports. His team has worked on drinking water and public health in Asia, Africa, North America, South America, and Europe. Dr. Frisbie has won numerous awards for outstanding research and teaching. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have Dr. Frisbie join us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, and welcome to Drinking Water, Naturally Occurring Metals, and Global Health. My name is Seth Frisbie. I want to begin with a history of drinking water. Since the beginning of human history until very recently, we have only used surface or dug well water for drinking, water that's easily accessible from the surface. That changed in 1862. The tube well was invented by Colonel Nelson W. Greene of the Union Army, and deep well water became easily accessible for drinking for the first time in our history. Today, billions of people use deep well water for drinking. Surface and dug well water, this type of water that we evolved drinking, often has microorganisms that can make a person sick hours or days after drinking. High dissolved oxygen from the atmosphere and the removal of ions by leaching gives surface and dug well water low concentrations of arsenic, manganese, iron, and other metals. In contrast, this new type of water that we've been drinking for about 160 years now, deep well water, rarely has pathogenic microorganisms. Low dissolved oxygen and the accumulation of ions from leaching gives deep well water high concentrations of arsenic, manganese, and other metals that can make a person sick after years or decades of regular drinking. The diagnosis of chronic metal poisoning is made difficult by the 5 to 20 or more years of exposure needed to produce symptoms. This graph suggests that arsenic is released from solids to deep well water by low dissolved oxygen. Now I want to talk about a history of drinking water in Argentina. In the 1880s, tube wells were first used in northern Argentina. The British installed them to service the steam engines of their railroad system, and the local people in Argentina quickly adopted these tube wells for drinking because they weren't getting sick from bacteria. But in 1916, Dr. Abel Ayerza, a very astute scientist, found that both people and their chickens had symptoms similar to pharmaceutical arsenic poisoning. And these are pictures from a little over a century ago, 1918, of a man with melanosis of the chest. We'll see more of this. And his chicken with the same kind of skin disease. Later, Ayerza checked things in common and found arsenic in the drinking water. Now I want to talk about a history of drinking water in Bangladesh. Rivers, ponds, and dug wells were the only practical source of drinking water since settlement for about 3,000 years until the 1970s. And again, these sources of water are very easy to access. You don't need steel. You need steel to have a deep well. A massive cholera outbreak began in 1963. This is a cholera hospital where I worked for a time. Many premature deaths were caused by drinking surface water. The life expectancy in the mid-1960s was only 46 years old because so many children less than 5 years old typically died prematurely from diarrheal disease, actually, from drinking contaminated surface water. Now that changed when Bangladesh became independent in 1971. The world community banded together and began installing 10 million of these hand pump wells. And here's a woman standing in what looks to be the middle of a lake. It's really a flooded river. And of course, she can't drink the surface water. It's contaminated with bacteria, but she's able to drink the deep well water. And within one generation, the population changed from drinking surface water to drinking groundwater. By the year 2000, approximately 97% of Bangladeshis drank tube well water. A tremendous change in the behavior of the entire population. The symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking water usually take 5 to 20 years to manifest. Chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking tube well water was first diagnosed in 1993. Chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking well water has 3 common symptoms. The first common symptom is melanosis of the chest. This is a 22-year-old male from our study area in Bangladesh. He has hundreds of little spots on his chest where he's lost his brown pigment. This is not melanoma, this is not skin cancer, but it's heading towards skin cancer. The second common symptom is keratosis of the palm, keratin growing on the palms of the hand. This man does have cancer. This is a carcinoma on the heel of his right hand, and he's also lost a finger to gangrene. The third common symptom is keratosis of the feet. This is the same symptoms that you see on the palms of people's hands, except it presents on the bottom of people's feet. This is a 44-year-old female with keratin growing on the bottom of her feet. In addition, you'll also see black foot disease. This is a 12-year-old female. The veins and arteries in her legs and feet leak blood, so the circulation from her lowest extremities, her feet, back to her heart is poor. She has these necrotic lesions that are subject to secondary infection and gangrene. It is inevitable. This 12-year-old girl must have her feet amputated. I once walked into a village where nobody was over 30 years old. So chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking well water is a real problem, not a theoretical exercise, and we need to protect these people. What I'd like to do is play a 7-minute video that features the medical expert from our team, Dr. Babita Hendra-Shakar from the University of Toronto and the Hospital for Sick Children. He's a world authority on metal-caused diseases, and he's been a faithful partner in over 25 years of working on this problem.
Arsenic poisoning was only discovered in Bangladesh recently, but scientists already know that pockets of contamination stretch across most of the country. The tragedy that's unfolding in Bangladesh may be even greater than in India. This has become the biggest poisoning in history. The news trickling out of Bangladesh has caught the attention of one of the world's experts on diseases caused by metals in Toronto. Dr. Babita Sarkar is a top researcher at the Hospital for Sick Children, and he teaches nearby at the University of Toronto. He's about to travel to Bangladesh to see this massive metal poisoning firsthand. Sarkar is about to begin a week-long journey into remote villages of Bangladesh, and Discovery Channel is joining him. He arrives in Dhaka, the capital of the country, and is taken to a small decrepit hospital downtown. That's where he's welcomed by 2 men who have been instrumental in uncovering the extent of the poisoning here. Most of the research on arsenic in Bangladesh has been done at this privately run hospital, even though it has little money and no equipment to even test the water samples. Most remote villages you can only reach by foot. Arsenic was discovered in the drinking water of this village 2 years ago. The first person we meet is a mother who sings a song of mourning. Her son just died of cancer. He had telltale signs of arsenic poisoning. In the early stages, arsenic poisoning can be tricky to detect. The skin either turns spotty or blackish. Arsenic accumulates in a protein in the skin. It slowly poisons the tissue until the cell can no longer carry on its normal activities, and the skin color changes. If people keep drinking arsenic for more than 10 years, the skin on the feet and hands deforms.
I have never seen anything quite like this.
By this time, so much arsenic has accumulated in the tissue that growth stops. These are the final external signs of a deadly buildup of arsenic inside. At this point, the poisoning cannot be reversed, and victims feel no pain until it finally hurts to stand. The team travels to half a dozen villages a day. Local doctors and villagers direct us to areas where people are sick. In the most contaminated villages, about a third of adults show symptoms. The children are also being poisoned, but few show the signs.
This is the smallest child that I've seen in this region who has come down with arsenic poisoning. He has melanosis on his trunk. And how old are you? I mean, তোমার বয়স কত? He's only 8 years old. And তোমার হাত দেখি? So this is not spread yet on his palms. Now this sort of situation, if it is, if this child is careful not to drink arsenic contaminated water, it is reversible. But if he continues to drink arsenic containing water, this will get worse from melanosis to spotty to finally to gangrene, and he's such a small little boy.
This boy was likely ingesting arsenic since he was a baby. Sarkar says he seems malnourished. It's hard to know how many others are dying or have died from arsenic poisoning. Eventually, it affects every part of the body, mutating cells inside the body and outside. Ultimately, chronic poisoning leads to lung or stomach or some other cancer, so the victims are impossible to track. We visit another village late one afternoon where the dilemma over what to do is apparent. The doctors from Dhaka are the first outside experts to visit here. As they have in dozens of other villages, the team takes hair, nail, urine, and water samples. Because arsenic collects in a protein in the hair and nails, doctors can analyze how much is in a villager's body, even if they're not showing signs. Many here are sick.
Oh, this is worse one I have seen.
The official responsible for water quality in this village tells Sarkar he doesn't know what to do. He's afraid to tell people to switch back to surface water because of disease. After 5 days in the villages, it's hard to come to grips with the numbers of people poisoned and the sheer span of time it took to do something. Perhaps arsenic just kills too slowly. It'll never grab the headlines or generate urgency like a sudden disaster. Rather, this kind of tragedy catches authorities off guard when something meant to help turns harmful. On the ferry home, we cross the Ganges, or Padma River as it's called in Bangladesh. The government in India plans to pump water from the Ganges to its villages, then build water treatment plants. It's an $800 million plan. On a more personal level, Dr. Sarkar is also struggling to come to terms with what he's seen in Bangladesh. He's the expert from Toronto.
I thought that I knew so much I can help. But here I come to a situation, first of all, the number of patients are such huge. The suffering is so much. I feel that all the knowledge that I have acquired over the years, I cannot apply it here. I know so little and I cannot do anything. And yet I thought that I know so much, and I feel very humbled.
In the medical world Dr. Sarkar is familiar with, so much is done to save just one life. He studies metal-related diseases that may affect only a few dozen people.
It hurts me because in my own work, so much money is being spent in research. In my whole work, I have probably spent several millions of dollars. We have so much luxury, and they just don't have the bare necessity of life, clean drinking water. That is what it boils down to. They don't have clean drinking water.
I'm very proud to say that our team made the first national scale map of arsenic concentration in Bangladesh's tube well water. We did this in 1997, and approximately 75 million Bangladeshis are at risk of death from skin, bladder, liver, and lung cancers caused by chronic arsenic poisoning. The source of arsenic is geological. Now, when we did this work in Bangladesh, we wanted to make sure that our laboratory was getting accurate results. So we came up with two tests for them. The first test is called independent standard recovery. And that's where we take, say, pure arsenic and add it to pure distilled water. And when we do this, we give it to the laboratory. We don't tell them how much arsenic is in the sample. They correctly report 83% of the true amount of arsenic. And that's very good. That's as good as any laboratory in the world can do. We also did this for ferrous iron. And when we do that, the laboratory recovers 93% of the ferrous iron when we take pure ferrous iron and add it to pure distilled water. And if we take total iron and add it to pure distilled water, the laboratory reports 75% of the correct amount of total iron. And this is exceptional. These people are using a 40-year-old spectrophotometer, and they're getting very, very, very good results. Now we came up with a second test. It's called sample matrix spike recovery. And here, instead of adding the pure arsenic to pure distilled water, we are adding the arsenic to a sample of drinking water. And good news, when we do this, we're able to recover 89% on average of the amount of arsenic in that sample. But this result changed my life. Look, if we take pure ferrous iron and add it to pure distilled water, just H2O, we recover 93% of that added ferrous iron. But if we take that pure ferrous iron and add it to a sample of drinking water, we only recover 34% on average. And when we try to recover total iron from a sample of drinking well water, our test completely fails. Well, the only difference is the water. With independent standard recovery, we're adding the pure chemical to pure water. With sample matrix study, we're adding the chemical to a sample of the drinking water. And what's the difference? Well, the samples of drinking water aren't pure. They have other things in them. So there's something in the drinking water that was preventing us from measuring ferrous iron and total iron. And this is called an interference. And we didn't know what was causing this problem, but we did the next best thing that we could do was we went to the library and we found out what might cause the trouble. And we found out that arsenic does not cause this trouble, but most likely some other toxic metal does. So what we did at that time was, this is a map of Bangladesh, and wherever we had this trouble measuring iron, we mapped the location with a capital letter E. And we'd be very, very happy if all the capital E's were in one small corner of the country, but they're not. They're all over the country. So this was the first time that another toxic metal besides arsenic was suggested to be widely distributed in Bangladesh's drinking well water. In addition, Dr. Sarkar, our medical expert, thought that the symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning were more severe than they should be given the amount of arsenic that people were exposed to. And here you can see an 18-month-old female presenting with the more advanced symptom of keratosis of the palm. Okay. So we went back to Bangladesh and did a second national scale sampling. The first national scale sampling was paid for by USAID. This was paid for from the personal savings of all the scientists involved in this project. And we discovered that 60% of Bangladesh's area contains groundwater with manganese concentrations greater than the WHO drinking water guideline. In children, manganese in drinking water is associated with IQ deficits, learning disabilities, and behavioral problems, including ADHD. And in adults, ingestion of manganese is associated with emotional ability, violent behaviors, and depression. We also discovered that about 3% of Bangladesh's area contains groundwater with lead concentrations greater than the WHO guideline. This is another neurotoxin, just like manganese. We found that less than 1% of Bangladesh's area had nickel concentrations greater than the WHO drinking water guideline. And less than 1% of Bangladesh's area also contained chromium with concentrations greater than the WHO guideline. So by paying attention in the laboratory and finding this interference, this trouble that we had measuring iron in the laboratory, we ultimately discovered that over 90 million people in Bangladesh were drinking water with unsafe concentrations of manganese, lead, nickel, and chromium. Since then, other workers and ourselves have identified pockets of Bangladesh with unsafe concentrations of boron, barium, molybdenum, and uranium. These have all been found above the World Health Organization health-based drinking water guidelines. So it pays great dividends to pay attention in the laboratory and think about what you're doing and make sure that your measurements are accurate. Okay. Now to talk a little bit about climate change and multi-metal exposure in Bangladesh. Most of Bangladesh is less than 12 meters above sea level. In a normal monsoon season, 1/3 of the cultivated land is flooded with a mixture of fresh and salt water. Bangladesh is about the size of the state of Wisconsin, and for about 2 months every year, 1/3 of the land is underwater. Can you imagine about half the people that live in the United States crammed into an area the size of Wisconsin, and then for 2 months each year, 1/3 of that land being underwater? That's what it's like in Bangladesh. We believe that flooding will likely increase the concentrations of arsenic, manganese, and other metals by creating something called a reducing environment and by something called the salt effect. Okay. So this graph shows the concentration of arsenic on the y-axis and something called oxidation reduction on the x-axis. And you can see the highest concentrations are under something we call reducing conditions. And that means generally for groundwater in the absence of dissolved oxygen. So the land gets flooded by a mixture of fresh water and seawater. That extra thickness of water inhibits the diffusion of oxygen from the atmosphere into the aquifer, and that facilitates the release of arsenic into the groundwater and the drinking well water. Okay. On the map, on the left is a map of arsenic concentration in Bangladesh. And on the right is a map of chloride concentration. This is the Indian Ocean to the south. And during the annual flooding, salt water from the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, intrudes on the southern third of Bangladesh, and of course, ocean water, salt water has high concentrations of chloride. Sodium chloride is the common salt in salt water. And you can see this excellent agreement between the concentration of arsenic and the concentration of chloride. Most of the arsenic and chloride is in southern Bangladesh. We have the highest concentrations in this part of Bangladesh near Fadrapur. You have these three little islands of high contamination in the north near these major river basins. So what this says to us is that the salt in the seawater is also facilitating the release of arsenic into Bangladesh's drinking well water. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the things we can do to help these people. Okay, so the first remedy is based on a comparison of these two maps. What we did in Bangladesh is we went to about 120 villages. This is the first time we went to Bangladesh in 1997. And we sampled about 5 wells in each village. And on the left is the map of the average amount of arsenic in each village. On the right is a map of the minimum amount of arsenic that we found in each village, or the safest well in each village. Anything that's colored blue or purple is unsafe, above the national standard. Okay, so again, on the left is the map of the average amount of arsenic in each village. We went to 120 villages. We sampled 5 different wells in each village, and that's the average for those 5 wells in each village. On the right is a map of the lowest amount of arsenic we found in each village. And this shaded area is about 15% of Bangladesh. And my question is, are there any wells in this 15% of Bangladesh that are safe to drink with respect to arsenic? The answer is no. There are no safe wells in this 15% of Bangladesh, because the safest well, the cleanest well, has a concentration that's greater than the national drinking water standard. But how about this white part of Bangladesh, 85% of the country? They have at least one safe well to drink from. So what we believe, and what has been happening for a long time, is that testing can provide safe water to millions of people in Bangladesh. And as a result of this discovery, groundwater testing has become a major component of an overall strategy for providing safe drinking water to the people of Bangladesh. 2 wells are considered safe and marked with green paint. Half the people in Bangladesh can't read, so we need a visual cue. These safe wells are marked with green paint if the arsenic concentration is less than the 50 part per billion national standard. Conversely, 2 wells are considered unsafe and marked with red paint if the arsenic concentration is greater than the national standard. So there was this army of technicians going well to well with portable field test kits, testing the water and painting the wells either green or red, depending on their result. Okay, so here's another strategy that we came up with. Whenever we went into a village, say this is the surface of the ground, we'd look for a shallow well right next to a very deep well. Okay, and on the y-axis is the concentration of arsenic in the shallow well, so the water's getting drawn from there. And on the x-axis is the concentration of arsenic from the deep well, right there. And I want to visually break the data in this graph into 2 parts. The first part I want to talk about is this group of points. You can see this has a slope of about 1, about a 45-degree angle. And what that means is the amount of arsenic in the deep well equals the amount of arsenic in the shallow well, more or less. And that says that the arsenic-containing mineral in that part of Bangladesh is very thick. Now, there are these points where you have a lot of arsenic in the shallow well, but much less in the deeper well. And in that part of Bangladesh, the arsenic-containing mineral is much thinner, and you can drill underneath it to get safer water. So that's a second approach. It's slower and more costly, but it is feasible. So here we are drilling a deeper well to provide safer water in a city in Bangladesh. Okay. The third strategy came about from our very observant geologist, Donald Maynard. In Bangladesh, there isn't enough electricity for the entire country at nighttime. So at nighttime, it's called load shedding. The electricity is diverted from rural areas back to the major cities. And this is a village with a water storage tank that has enough water for 300 people. And what they would do is, at the end of the day, just before the electricity got shut off, is they would pump water into their storage tank. And the amount of arsenic that was coming into the storage tank was 160 part per billion. And that water would sit unsettled, undisturbed for overnight. So there wasn't any turbulence, and it would have time to react with the oxygen in the atmosphere. And remember, once arsenic reacts with oxygen, it becomes insoluble and precipitates from solution. And by morning, the amount of arsenic in the water was unmeasurable, less than 2 parts per billion, because it had was oxidized and probably absorbed on the surface of oxidized iron and settled to the bottom of the tank, and people were able to drink the safe water from the top of the tank. So that's a good example of just being observant. Our geologist saw the situation, and he realized that it was very important to look at this and study this and see if he could come up with a solution to help these people drink safer water. Okay, so here's a picture of a different water treatment system in Bangladesh. There are many of these being installed. The trouble is they get installed, but they're not always properly maintained. They run out of parts. It takes a fair amount of vigilance to make sure that these continue to provide safe water. Now, arsenic and manganese and these other things that we found in Bangladesh's drinking water, they don't care about political maps. Okay, so people knew that there was arsenic in West Bengal, India's drinking well water, which is adjacent to Bangladesh, just west of Bangladesh. In fact, they knew about arsenic in West Bengal before they knew about Bangladesh. But no one had been there to test for manganese or these other things that we were finding in Bangladesh. We went to West Bengal, India, and we sampled this village. We sampled in the shape of a cross to give us like a Y and an X axis for mapping. And we certainly found arsenic. That was no surprise. We also found manganese, boron, fluoride, and thorium as well. I'll talk a little bit about why we found thorium. We did find In West Bengal's drinking water, we found lead, and we found uranium, but they weren't above the World Health Organization drinking water guidelines, but we did find them. And just so you know, about 2% of the world's lead was present when the planet was formed, and about 49% of the world's lead has since come from the radioactive decay of uranium. In addition, about 49% of the world's lead has, since the Earth was formed, has come from the radioactive decay of thorium. So we had this idea to test for thorium to see if it was there. It was. There's not a drinking water guideline for thorium, so we don't know what level is safe or not safe. We do know that thorium does cause liver cancer based on injection exposure from work done in the 50s. But we don't know if the amount that we found would be considered safe according to the World Health Organization. But here's another example of just paying attention. We found lead, we found uranium. Most likely there's thorium. We tested for it, and yes, we found it. Okay, so we went to the other side of Bangladesh, to the east of Bangladesh, to Myanmar. And this is us working in Myanmar. And no surprise, we found arsenic, fluoride, manganese, and uranium above World Health Organization drinking water guidelines in Myanmar. We just finished a project in Kathmandu, Nepal. And this is in the high Himalaya. And this is the source of the sediment that has the arsenic. So, of course, we found arsenic, iron, manganese, mercury, aluminum, all these things. If you want to find a gold mine, you go to the mountains, because when the Earth was cooling, the heavier, more dense elements sunk into the Earth's crust, and through mountain building, they become exposed, and we can feebly scratch away at the surface of these mountains and maybe find a rare element like gold or silver or arsenic. So this is the eastern drainage basin of the Himalaya. These are the eastern Himalaya. And this is the drainage basin extending from northeast India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, all the way into Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, following the major river systems. This is the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Meghna, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong. And what's going on is, this is probably a quarter of the world's population, this recent switch from drinking surface water to drinking deep well water has caused something that's caused the largest mass poisoning in history. So this entire region has very high concentrations of naturally occurring arsenic in their deep well water. And that arsenic and manganese and uranium and other things was not accessible until we began installing many tens of millions of these hand pump wells.
So what inspired you to work in this field?
Okay, that's a great question. Initially, I was interested in working on world hunger. And initially, my training at the undergraduate level was in soil science and in soil fertility. And then I came to the realization that hunger was mostly a man-made problem. Okay, wars, economics, transportation. There was really no problem with the ability of agricultural systems to produce enough food. We just couldn't get it to the people who needed it all the time. But that training gave me a very solid foundation in what you would call geochemistry, how the minerals in soil and geological materials interact with water in the environment. And then on through graduate school, I focused more and more on chemistry and also in toxicology, the science of poison. So I specialize in analytical chemistry, measuring toxic compounds in drinking water. And it's been a really, really good mix. So it wasn't anything that I intended to do, to be a drinking water scientist from the start. The most important thing, and this is the best advice I ever got from my advisor at Cornell, David Bolden: take as much math, chemistry, and physics as you can stomach, and you can do anything. I've worked in engineering, I've worked in public health, I've taught at universities, I've worked in the chemical industry, consulting, and it's really opened a lot of doors for me.
That was going to be another question I had, was what advice would you give to the students watching that would like to go into a career studying water quality and chemistry?
Great question. It would be along the same lines. What we need are the best trained people possible. Think about it. A public health scientist made the decision to install tens and ultimately hundreds of millions of these hand pump wells throughout the developing world without testing a single drop of water for naturally occurring arsenic or other naturally occurring toxic elements. How would you like to be living with that? So we need people that have a high level of training in the fundamental sciences that apply that training to solving some of the complex problems in the world today. You saw that in addition to drinking well water, we were working on climate change, which is certainly very topical. But again, that training in math, chemistry, and physics is so versatile and so transportable. And I'm going to tell you something. I mean, I'm a chemistry professor, or I just retired as a chemistry professor. It's a secret. Chemistry is easy, okay? Because, or math is easy, or physics is easy, because the answers are almost always unambiguous. 1 + 2 always equals 3. If you want to do something that's complicated, do psychology, economics, philosophy, where 1 + 2 doesn't always equal 3. They seem easier, but they're really not, because we don't understand things at such a fundamental level that we do the physical sciences and mathematics.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share your information with us. This is such important knowledge for students to see and understand things that are going on in other parts of the world that could possibly impact places here in the United States as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your information with us.
We do have arsenic problems in the United States. Like I say, these are naturally occurring metals that we expect to find in drinking water. In Vermont, we have arsenic in the Lamoille River Valley, and I'm sure you could do a very quick search and find from the U.S. Geological Survey, they have a very detailed map of arsenic-contaminated drinking well water throughout the United States. And again, our drinking water standard is not based on current science and engineering. It's based on 29-year-old out-of-date information that should be updated. So that's a whole other thing. There's the policy side. The science is great, but we need policy that can keep up with science and engineering.
Yeah.
Lots to do.
Lots of work to do. Well, thank you again. And like I said, I appreciate you joining us, and I'm very excited to share this. And we will have an activity associated with this as well. Probably look up those maps and include them in there for you. But yeah, so thank you and have a great day. Want to learn more about our Lunch with a Scientist program? Make sure to like and subscribe and visit us online at www.headwaterscienceinstitute.org for a full list of our video library and curriculum.